Hey everybody, it is Chris, and we are celebrating the first anniversary of Post Games. The show made it a year, and a large part of why that is possible is because of Patreon supporters. I, on top of this version, have a Patreon feed that people can get for as little as $5 a month. $5 allows for this show to continue and to grow, and for me to pay for insurance, all the wonderful things that I need to do for myself and for my family. I also want people who subscribe to get something for themselves too. You ultimately are paying for a product, and I should give you one. So, Patreon subscribers get bonus sections in every single episode. They can range from 50 to even 45 minutes. They get mini episode bonuses. I have the Patreon book club where we've talked about games like Perfect Tide Station to Station and Titanium Court with the creators of those games. And as you are about to hear, I have a monthly series called Past Games, in which I invite an expert to talk about the history of a game that is celebrating its anniversary this year. So, since it's 2026, we are celebrating a lot of anniversaries from 1986, 1996, 2006. This episode was actually voted on by the patrons to share with you as an example of what makes Past Games and the Patreon special. So I think you will enjoy it. It is bonkers. There's so much I did not know about Zelda, from an early multiplayer prototype to thoughts about it being a science fiction series and so much more. So with that out of the way, I will throw to it. We'll be back to normal episodes next week. And again, if you want to support the show, please consider going to patreon.com/postgames. It is a tremendous help. And if you don't want to, or you just can't, thank you so much for listening here. And that is enough of me, I guess, begging for support and help. Here's what you came for: a new episode of the show. Hello, and welcome to Post Games, a podcast about how and why we love video games. I am your host, Chris Plant, and you are listening to the Patreon exclusive series, Past Games. If you are totally new here, no worries, I'll catch you up real quick. Past Games is a year-long series in which I'm digging deep into the games with big anniversaries in 2026. For example, did you know that it is the 30th anniversary of Pokemon? You might if you heard a previous episode of Past Games that I actually put on the main feed. Today, we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of another Nintendo classic, The Legend of Zelda. Yes, that is right. Zelda and Link and friends are turning 40. And that is just how time works, especially when you've decided to do a series reflecting, in part, on your own mortality. Anyway, today's guest is Max Nichols, video game designer, educator, and Zelda historian. By day, Max has worked on some of the biggest franchises in gaming, but it is his Zelda expertise that's brought him to Post Games. Nichols oversees Hyrule Interviews, a beloved website database that contains over 1,000 interviews with members of the many different Legend of Zelda teams from over the years. The Q&As range from all the way back in 1986 to earlier this year, with subjects going from the macro, like high-level plans for Zelda adaptations across media, to the micro, like a designer's social media message about color bleeding in extremely technical detail. Our conversation begins with the origins of the original The Legend of Zelda, which celebrates its 40th anniversary, like I said, this year. So you already knew that, but did you know The Legend of Zelda began as a sci-fi game? I'm serious, I did not know that, or many of the other details that Nichols shares. It is a surprising conversation, and there will be a few times you're like, that can't be right. But then you will realize you are listening to someone who has archived all of these first-hand accounts. And that's just the beginning. After that, Nichols speed runs us through the series' history, and to wrap things up, we chat about the parallel history of Zelda fandom, which has been going on just as long as Zelda, and now is massive. In fact, you could kind of think of it like many different fandoms that fall under a single umbrella, shield, I guess like a leaf? That he floats under a leaf? That sure. We're gonna go with that. Nichols references tons of useful resources and also shared an extended list following our conversation. It's huge, and you can find it in the show notes. But I don't want to delay you any further. We have 40 years of Zelda history to get through, so let's get to it. As a video game journalist who has been doxxed, I am constantly preaching the message of personal data hygiene. I think every person should be aware of how much their personal information, phone numbers, addresses, health information, and more is available for other people to find on the internet, and that those private details are being sold without your consent by data brokers and can be used for scams, harassment, and other illegal activity. The problem is so widespread, you could lose entire days to finding who has your info, requesting that they remove it, and keeping these bad parties accountable. That is why I recommend Incogni. The moment you subscribe and authorize removal, Incogni begins searching data brokers, online directories, people databases, and commercial databases. When I signed up, over 200 removal requests were sent instantly. Within 30 minutes, 60 requests had been completed. That is not just a number. I could literally look to see the data brokers that have been contacted on my behalf and begun the data removal process. Incogni's work doesn't end there. It keeps checking back in with the data brokers because with new personal data hacks, your info can begin to crop up in some of those old, gnarly places. After going independent as a journalist, I began searching for the right data personal removal service for me. Incogni is exactly what I was looking for and has already brought me tremendous peace of mind. I think it could do the same for you. To get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan, go to incogni.com/postgames or click the link in the episode description box. That's incogni.com/postgames. Y'all, I recently turned 40, which is tough because that means I officially need to be a grown-up. And with being a grown-up, I've had an epiphany. I can look pretty nice if I, try. If I actually choose the clothes that I want to wear, it's going to be pretty okay. And especially when I choose clothes from a place that knows what the hell it is doing. Quince has become my go-to. The fabrics, they feel elevated, the fits, they are clean, and everything just works without needing to overthink it. Quince has all the wardrobe staples for spring. Think 100% European linen shorts and shirts from $34. Lightweight, breathable, comfortable, but still look put together. And clean 100% Pima cotton tees with a softness that has to be felt. Their pants also hit that same balance, they're relaxed, they're comfortable, but still polished enough to wear pretty much anywhere, or in my case, definitely anywhere. Everything is priced 50 to 80% less than what you think at similar brands. Quince works directly with ethical factories and cuts out the middlemen, so you're getting premium materials without the markup. Just last week was in New York trying to look good. I was rocking one of those 100% European linen relaxed short sleeve shirts, button up, and I don't want to brag, got some real compliments, which was maybe a first in my entire life. Turns out it feels good to look good. And in a week where I had to take a whole bunch of meetings, it was nice to feel really confident. You can refresh your everyday with luxury that you'll actually use. Head to quince.com/postgames for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That is QUINCE.com/postgames for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/postgames. Development for the original Zelda game began in 1984 for the Famicom Disk System. Now, this add-on never came to the US. Can you tell folks how the disk system worked?
Basically, the Famicom came out a few years prior to the disk system. It was cartridge-based. The disk system was I think it was an add-on for the Famicom that came out a few years later. And when they say disk, it's not like CD disks, it's floppy disks. And its big feature, other than cheaper production for Nintendo, was read and write capability. So like they made a big deal, or were trying to make a big deal, of games that allowed players to write stuff to the disk.
Why was Zelda, of all things, initially conceptualized for that feature set?
Two things. First of all, it actually wasn't initially conceptualized for that feature set.
Oh.
It was originally started development for something called the Nintendo Versus system. Are you familiar with that?
Only vaguely, so please tell me more.
It was basically arcade cabinets with Famicom tech in them. And it was sort of a limited thing that Nintendo was trying to do for a while to kickstart their arcade business. But the original start of Zelda was as a game for those arcade cabinets.
But the Versus system is multiplayer.
Yes.
So the first idea of Zelda is multiplayer then?
When they started working on Zelda 1, the idea was that it was going to be a dungeon crawler. It was not going to have an overworld. And it was going to be a dungeon maker. It was going to be a game where one player could make dungeons and the other player would play them. That was the original concept when they started development.
Every person who has been begging Nintendo to make a Mario Maker for Zelda right now is suddenly even more furious than they already were. How does it go from that then to disk system to what we know today?
So I'm actually not sure. Some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, I don't know the order of, like inspirations, sure. Maybe which ones came first, that sort of thing. So I don't know if the Dungeon Maker plan was before or at the same time or after the Versus system plan. But it makes sense to me that it was the same time, because that sounds like the only version of multiplayer Zelda I could think of. But they basically found that, first of all, I think on the business side, the Versus system wasn't taking off. Right? There's a reason that probably most of the listeners here have not heard of it, which is that it wasn't a big deal. So Nintendo was moving on from that and focusing more on the Famicom Disk System and the NES. And at the same time, the Zelda dev team was finding that, I think this was all paper design at this point, but they were basically deciding that it was more fun to play dungeons than it was to make them. They couldn't figure out how to make a fun dungeon maker, basically. So they shifted plans. And at that point, they weren't really making use of the Famicom Disk System's special flagship tech. It just happened to be on the Famicom Disk System.
So then at that point, it's like, well, if we don't need to use the disk system, we might as well put it on the Famicom, because that will also mean it can be released eventually in the United States.
The NES is weird because it's kind of both. A lot of the technology that they put into the Famicom Disk System, they had on the NES, because they could essentially expand the capabilities of the NES by adding on to the chips that were inside the cartridges. Its technology was expandable. Games could have save batteries that weren't part of the core system, which of course Zelda did. It was the first console game to do that. And they could do stuff like better sound chip if a game company really wanted to for the NES.
That is so interesting, because I had never thought of the Famicom and NES as unique devices, which obviously I should have. They are unique devices. There's a reason they're not called the same thing. They look different. They would have different ways of acting. Speaking of things that are kind of the same and kind of not, the Mario team and Zelda team have a history of being connected. How much overlap is there between the initial Mario team and the initial Zelda team?
Almost total overlap. They were developed concurrently. Most of their development was at the same time as each other. Mario, of course, was released earlier, but only a little bit earlier, really, in the span of time for game dev terms. The three most important people to know about, of course, are Shigeru Miyamoto, which your listeners probably all know, And then who I call the co-creator of Zelda, Takashi Tezuka. Miyamoto was the producer and the director, and Tezuka was a co-director. So they were both equal listed on the director side of things. They basically handled the same amount of development work. And then the third guy is Toshihiko Nakago, who was the engineering lead. But he was very close with those other two, and he was the engineering lead for both Mario and Zelda. And he eventually became like the CEO of Nintendo's like weird engineering subsidiary company. So he's still around.
When you say Tezuka is the co-director, what do you mean by that? What credit should we be giving him that often kind of Stan Lee-esque gets, put onto Miyamoto in the same way that Stan Lee gets all credit for Marvel?
Yeah, so Miyamoto probably does deserve a little bit more credit because he was the producer as well, and he was the senior designer of the two on the team. And I think he was the one who set like the vision essentially at the highest level. He was the one who decided like what the game was. But once it was in production, Tezuka was deeply involved. Like Miyamoto drew one half of the map of the overworld, and Tezuka drew the other half in a single sitting. By the way, that's a fun story. Like Tezuka was the writer of the story, and he was the designer for Link. Like you hear a lot about like, oh, Zelda was inspired by Miyamoto's, explorations of the countryside. We don't know as much about what might have inspired Tezuka, but he was an equal force there, really.
There's a lot of like speculation about this, right? That like Tolkien may have inspired Tezuka, but then it's not actually clear.
Yes. So there's a commonly quoted thing that Tezuka was inspired by Tolkien. And yesterday, in preparation for this podcast, I was trying to find a primary source for this. I was like, I hear this all the time, but I've read like 1,000 interviews, but I've never seen this. So I did a bit of a dive into like the Wikipedia page, which cites this, by the way. And they cite a German Club Nintendo magazine where there's one paragraph written by like the magazine editor that says that he was inspired by Lord of the Rings. So there's no actual evidence of this. It's believable, but
I don't want to, I'm not, in no way am I saying fake news or any of those things, but it is worth noting that video game magazines, especially in this era, you really had to fill the pages. There's no guarantee that this is a real thing. You mentioned earlier the filling out the world. Literally, the game was drawn out on a graph paper. Is that right?
Yes.
And when they did this, I don't know if this is true or canonical, so this is why I'm asking you. I had heard that only half of the actual map got programmed into the game by mistake. Is that correct?
Sort of. So I don't remember the exact details, but basically the gist of it was that Miyamoto had given the engineers, so Toshihiko Nakago, this direction that they wanted to have so much space for dungeons. And the dungeons all coexisted on this same map, essentially. Like every time you go into a dungeon, like if you were to somehow glitch through the wall and go to the next, tile over, you would be in a different dungeon. They're on the same map. And the programmers, either he miscommunicated or the programmers misunderstood, and they actually did it like way more efficiently than they needed to, and they ended up with a whole nother set of dungeons worth of unused map that they had allocated memory for. So that's why they made the second quest, because they had spare space.
Wild. That's also so much more interesting than my understanding of, we only made half. We actually were so efficient we could make more. That's incredible. I want to hear about this story. Because at this point, when this game is coming out, very few games have a story as we understand it today. We've done a previous episode on Donkey Kong, which is only a couple years before this, and this bold idea that, like, there's a story in the thinnest possible way.
Right.
Narrative designer obviously wasn't established as a career at this time. How did Zelda's fantasy story, as we understand it in the very first entry, come together?
It started off as a sci-fi story. Have you heard that one?
No. This is awesome because, I prepare for these and very rarely am I surprised, and I'm just boom, boom. It's all surprises today.
So There's an interview from a French magazine, I'm forgetting the name of the magazine right now, where Miyamoto is asked, like, why is Link named Link? Which somehow no one had ever asked him really before, or he'd never answered at least. And the answer, people often say, oh, he's called Link because he's the link between the player and the game. The real answer is that Miyamoto had a story idea that was that Link was going to be a time traveler, and the pieces of the Triforce were going to be computer chips, and Link was going to be linking the energy of people across the eons, like Chrono Trigger, basically. So that was the initial concept before it became fantasy.
It kind of rips. I'm not going to lie. Like, I wouldn't mind that version of the game. Does that have anything to do with the game's kind of ongoing fascination with time travel and time in general?
That's a very good question. I think it's kind of a coincidence because we know, like, the reason Ocarina of Time had time travel was because Miyamoto wanted... I'm getting ahead of myself here, but Miyamoto wanted to have, like, a growing up story, and he wanted to have the contrast between the two. So that's why they did time travel. And then I think Ocarina of Time was the big influence on the latter games for time travel.
Okay, so I have read that Miyamoto and the team on Zelda liked role-playing games, but saw them as very talky. So what then is the inspiration for this? One, what are they even looking at that's talky? And then how do we get here?
Yes, this is a fun question for me because I love the history of RPGs. Miyamoto has talked about, he has outright said that Zelda 1 was influenced by Ultima and Black Onyx, which were two major landmark RPGs. Ultima was like one of the two big arms of RPGs in the 80s, right? There was Ultima and there was Wizardry. And Wizardry was bigger in Japan, and Ultima was bigger in the US. That's kind of the origin of the JRPG/CRPG split, by the way. And Black Onyx was essentially a clone of Wizardry, which was made by that Tetris guy. I'm forgetting his name right now. But anyways, that was a big influence on Zelda. Miyamoto was a fan of these role-playing games, and he has said that the thing he liked about them was that they were games about growing in strength, right? Like, he liked the fact that you leveled up and got stronger, but he didn't like the actual gameplay. He wanted to have direct control of his character. It's also likely, but he's never admitted this publicly, that it was influenced by games like Highblade and Xanadu, which were pre-Zelda top-down action RPGs. And all these games are like dungeon crawlers, right? Which is why it makes sense that Zelda started off as a dungeon crawler. But that's kind of the big game influences on Zelda.
There's one thing that you just mentioned there that I want to make sure we hit on is it starts off as a dungeon crawler. It truly is just a series of dungeons at a certain point.
Yep.
How does it go from that to the overworld experience?
I've seen a quote about in an interview about this, and I forget how exactly it went, but basically the gist of it was they were like, it'd be cool if we could walk in the overworld too. And then they tried it, and bam, that's the most important feature of Zelda. That's like why it is what it is. It was kind of a thing that just came to them, and they tried it one day, and that's how we got the overworld.
I love when something is just as simple as like, I wonder if that would work. And then it's like, oh, now we have open world games. Okay, cool. I was going to ask about the names. You already answered Link, but what about Zelda? Am I actually right to believe that this is a F. Scott Fitzgerald, Zelda Fitzgerald reference? Or?
Yes, that is correct. Zelda's named after Zelda Fitzgerald.
Perfect. Broken clock is right once a day right here. I'm loving it.
Impa is named after the English word impart, because
Why?
she's the one who tells you the story and imparts the quest to you. Very simple origin there. I don't actually know why Ganon is named Ganon.
I will not ask you to make a guess, but I will ask this. The game had some setbacks. We mentioned the kind of strangeness of making literally programming the world into the game. The team also planned on using Maurice Raval's song Bolero for the opening titles, and only learned, and correct me if this is false, from what I understand, only learned it was under copyright shortly before production.
That is correct. I think it was basically like, according to Japanese copyright law, they were too early. They needed to wait 2 more months before the copyright was going to become open domain, or not open domain, whatever the term is, free to use. in Japan, and they couldn't wait those couple months. So the story goes, Koji Kondo has told the story that he had to do like an overnighter to come up with the new title theme for the game.
So the song that everybody knows was written overnight.
That is how it's often retold, but this was specifically the title theme, not the overworld theme. The overworld theme was already composed.
So it's impressive, but not impossibly
right.
impressive.
It's not like the Zelda theme was done in overnight at the last second. It was just the title theme. I've always wanted to hear what Kondo's rendition of Ravel's Bolero was going to be. That's never been public. It'd be cool to hear.
I do want to say that I'm going to throw to it right now as a surprise, but I am instead going to throw momentarily to the now archive.org version of Bolero for people to hear. Before I do that, I do have one more question about this making of period, which Nintendo games up until really like the late 1990s, it was never a guarantee that a game would come to the United States. Was this game always meant to be an appealing thing for Western audiences, or what was its journey to the West without trying to put a pun on it?
That is a good question. I can say that Miyamoto himself often thought about targeting Western audiences with his games. He's kind of an Anglophile, right? He loves music from America. He loves American cartoons. His very first game was designed for America first because of the fact that America was where they had spare arcade cabinets that needed to have their circuit boards used for Donkey Kong. So he's always been looking at America as a audience for his games. But I don't know specifically about Zelda.
I'm going to take a break. We're going to listen to Bolero. And there's one thing that I want to just say here about what's blowing my mind about this, and also I guess to set expectations for the next section, is it is so hard to find much history about Japanese game development versus English game development. Part of that is like the language barrier. Part of it, though, is also like a willingness to speak frankly about how games are made because of how dynamics between employees and companies work and the opportunities with the press. And I am just astounded by how much you've collected so far, and I can't wait to get to the next section. Y'all, it's not fair. The end of the day, when I need to cook a healthy meal is when I'm also peak exhausted. I've been doing everything I need to do for my family, for my friends, for work, and then I gotta cook. For me, eating healthy, it's not a willpower problem, it's a setup problem. Until, that is, I found Factor. Factor makes everything so much easier for me by giving me healthy options crafted by chefs that are delivered right to my door. I'm hitting those nutritional goals this season without planning, without grocery runs, without cooking. And the meals, they are delicious. I'm a longtime fan of the butternut squash and sage chicken macaroni. I like the ginger teriyaki salmon. I'm a bit of a salmon person. I also love the shredded chicken taco bowl. But there is something for everybody here. There's a more protein option. They got GLP-1 support. They've got a calorie-conscious option. Every meal is crafted with functional ingredients, lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole foods, and healthy fats. No artificial colors or sweeteners, no high-fructose corn syrup, just nutrient-dense food. It's fresh. It's never frozen. They have over 100 rotating weekly meals, and you can try the newly launched ready-to-eat salads with vibrant ingredients like elote corn and miso edamame, plus 70 plus add-ons to round out your nutrition, and everything is ready in 2 minutes. Again, at the end of the day, what more could you ask for than Factor, which shops, preps, cooks, and delivers straight to your door? More time for me and more time for you then to do everything you want to do this spring. I so enjoy Factor. It's tasty as it is simple to rely on, and I think that you're going to enjoy it too. So head to factormeals.com/postgames50 off and use code postgames50 off to get 50% off and free daily greens per box with new subscription only while supplies last until September 27th, 2026. See website for more details. That's postgames50 off. We're going to talk about the evolution of Zelda over the years. You know I'm going to get to that, the Adventure of Link. But before we do that, do you remember the first time you played a Zelda game?
I do. I got Link's Awakening and a Game Boy for Christmas. And I was quite young. I was probably like 6, maybe 5. I couldn't read yet. I tried playing it. It was too weird and hard for me. I set it aside. And then I actually, the next time I played it, I was at the hospital being diagnosed with diabetes. And I found Link's Awakening in their like kids' room. And I played it for like 3 days straight while I was at this hospital. And that was when I actually fell in love with Zelda.
It's amazing how often I talk to people our age where their origin of being an indoor kid or of loving video games is that. Like some moment of being in a hospital as a kid or just being, in their room for a long period of time. And some adult being like, well, I didn't want to give you video games, but I guess you can have it now. And then a lifetime passion is born.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Very relatable. I grew up in and out of hospitals with cleft palate surgery, so I'm now coming to terms with, so that's why I was always playing video games. Let's talk about a game that came out before. I guess that would be right, the one that you just mentioned. The first sequel to Zelda, perhaps the most controversial of all Zelda games. Can you tell folks about The Adventure of Link?
Yes. I know a lot less about this than I do Zelda 1. There's a lot less material out there, but basically it was a different team. Miyamoto was still in charge, but it had a different director. It had actually very little overlap with the Zelda 1 team other than Miyamoto himself. It didn't even have Koji Kondo doing the music. So that's kind of why it's Black Sheep. It was just this totally different thing. Some of their goals when they were making that game was they wanted to basically make a sword combat simulation kind of game. They wanted to make like an action side scroller that like really got the feel of having a sword fight with someone. And they decided to make it a Zelda game after that. It didn't start off as a Zelda game. It was kind of just this pitch for a sword fighting side scroller game that they applied the Zelda franchise to.
Is it like... This is complicated, I guess, because I'm thinking of Mario 2 in the US, which is a very different game than Mario 1. And understandably, it is not originally Mario 2 when it's developed. But it seems like Nintendo is kind of figuring out what a sequel should be to its video games at this point. Like, what is okay to put a number 2 on your box? Is that kind of what's going on here? Like, they themselves don't even know what a sequel is?
I mean, definitely. Back then, like this was the mid to late 80s, right? Like, there were no game series at least in the console space that had like a legacy of mini games they were building on, right? Everything was new. Even the sequels were like big leaps in quality or scope or whatever it might be. So there's this concept of a game series kind of just didn't exist yet.
Why do you think Nintendo did break from that original formula? Had they not seen the success of the original game yet, or what was going on there?
So this is kind of getting into me like guessing territory, but there's a few elements here. One was that Zelda still had these RPG roots for Miyamoto. Miyamoto has said that he was the one who designed Zelda 2. He provided the team with the design. So it is still coming from Miyamoto, at least to a certain extent. And like he's talked about how like at this point they were thinking about Link to the Past as well. And he's talked about how Link to the Past was going to be like a party-based game. And he's talked about how some of the elements of Zelda 2 were ideas that they had for Link to the Past. At this point, it was just Zelda 3. So like it wasn't seen as this big divergence at the time. And if you go back and read the reviews from game magazines at the time, like people are excited about it. They think it's awesome. They got rave reviews. It obviously didn't change gaming like Zelda 1 did, but like it wasn't until years later that it was looked at as a black sheep.
Well, let's talk about the game that kind of did change gaming, and you just said it, which is A Link to the Past. Miyamoto felt he needed to do something more than the action-adventure game by the time they're deep into development here, because from what I understand, competitors had already begun to crowd the genre. Zelda is seen. Immediately people are like, oh, this is a thing. He has spoken about the focus being, quote, interacting in the world. What did he mean by that?
Okay, so it's a little bit hard to understand if someone like were to play the game for the first time now. But if you've played Link to the Past and you can think back to it, you can do stuff like grab and then push and pull blocks. You can pick up rocks or pots. There's switches that you can just run against to push them physically in the world. You can hit enemies to knock them off of an edge. It had this physicality to it that people hadn't really seen in really most action games, period, but let alone action RPGs or action adventure games like this. So that was actually like a major theme for Link to the Past, was making you feel the world that you were a part of physically with bumping and running into things and interacting with things. Like he's talked about how like they wanted to make it so that you could set fire to grass and the fire would spread and fill the screen with fire, and how they wanted to let you have a shovel and dig a path, a ditch from a pond to another spot and let the water flow through the ditch you just dig. Like they had these very ambitious, like almost Breath of the Wild like when you hear them now, ideas for Link to the Past that didn't really come to all the way to fruition, but the themes were still present in the final game.
It sounds like the lineage to Breath of the Wild is not as different than it might seem at first blush then.
Yeah. Like people will talk about how, oh, Breath of the Wild, it's like Zelda 1. Zelda got a lot more constrained after Zelda 1. A Link to the Past started off with this, or at least early, I don't know where it started exactly, but it had, during development, it had this idea of all this freedom and simulating mechanics. Somebody on the team talked about how they wanted to make it so you could solve problems in different ways and walk around obstacles and just approach things from different angles, and how they made the game more shut down and more like gated and stuff because they couldn't figure out how to tell a good story in a game that was too open. And telling a story was actually a major goal in A Link to the Past.
Between A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, and Ocarina of Time, I feel like a formula is established that seems relatively fair to say. What makes a Legend of Zelda game at this time?
So I have a list here of themes that I think are true for every Zelda game. If you look at the series over time, most Zelda games are like coming of age stories. They are built to evoke feelings of exploration and adventure. Miyamoto has said that Indiana Jones and treasure hunting were inspirations for Zelda 1, and that's clear throughout the series. He contrasted the series with Mario, where Mario is linear and you just go and it's acrobatic. Zelda's a game that's non-linear and you have to think about what to do. And then last but not least, Zelda directors have talked about the satisfaction of solving a puzzle is like a defining feature of Zelda. So a lot of those things were present in the first game, but Link to the Past kind of brought forward the concept of like item gating, and it kind of introduced our first taste of what we would think of as a modern Zelda dungeon, where there's mechanics that change stuff in other rooms, and there's complicated switches and unique mechanics in certain dungeons, and you always get an item in them. Link's Awakening probably even more firmly established what I would call the first modern Zelda dungeons. They're just more in line with the style of puzzles and progression that, you know, following games had. Link's Awakening was the first Zelda game to have weird characters everywhere, right? It's famously influenced by the Twin Peaks television show, which in turn influenced Ocarina of Time. And then Link to the Past, of course, introduces the world structure, which is almost identical to the world structure that Ocarina of Time has. So what Ocarina of Time does is it takes these elements that are already established by the prior two games and makes them work in 3D, which was kind of a dramatic undertaking, like a really difficult problem for them. And of course, at the time, they established, like, for the entire game industry, what a third-person action game could be. Nobody had really succeeded at that before.
For decades after Ocarina of Time, it became kind of the default answer for the question, what's the greatest game of all time? Maybe that's less so now, but it had a hell of a run there for a while.
Right.
What was it about that game that warranted that reputation?
That's the question, isn't it? Part of it's because it was a lot of firsts, right? But part of it was just like a perfect storm of game development inspiration happening. A lot of problems, game design problems that nobody had really solved yet in a third person kind of real time game. Stuff like camera control, how to maintain your orientation against the combat in like a melee combat scenario. Stuff like how do we make sure the player notices things in the environment if they are the ones controlling the camera. And Ocarina of Time kind of decisively solved all these problems, right? Like Z-targeting basically solved all those problems I mentioned. Z-targeting and Navi. But it solved these fundamental problems that nobody had solved before. And at the same time, it kind of knocked it out of the park in every other element, right? Even now, the music is amazing. The story was very evocative for people. It's not like front and center like it might have been like a fantasy game or something, but people have emotional connection to that story very strongly. Just the scope of it, right? Like this idea of the world grows up. There's a 7-year time jump. That would still be like feel like a bold choice now if they announced a new Zelda game that had that. We'd be like, whoa, that's crazy and ambitious. It was 10 times as ambitious in 1998. It just really hit a higher note than like basically any other game had at that point in time.
Between Ocarina of Time and the Breath of the Wild, the general formula for a Zelda game stayed relatively the same, and yet these games are all very different and strange in their own ways. How did the teams continue to experiment during this time?
It's one of my favorite topics. There's two things I like to talk about here. Obviously, there's all sorts of things they experimented with, especially like art styles and the like. I'm less of an expert on art, but like I'm a game designer, so I paid a lot of attention to like how are they building their world, and how does exploration work, and how does the design of the mechanical design of puzzles work. And so like Ocarina of Time had this world that if you go back and play it now, you can kind of see it a little bit more for what it is, which is that it's pretty small. It's not like gonna wow anyone now. And I think that sort of perspective was shifting quickly in 2000, right? People were doing bigger and crazier worlds than Ocarina of Time already, like within a year or two, right? It lost its title. So the Zelda team couldn't just do Ocarina of Time again. Of course, let's set aside Majora's Mask because it was kind of an evolutionary offshoot for the series, but as amazing as it is. But the next major one was The Wind Waker. And The Wind Waker was open world, but it had some big problems. For the beginning of the game, they had this story they were trying to tell. So like every time you tried to go off into this open world, like a character would be like, no, let's not go that way yet. We have to go here. And they put in all these invisible walls, and it felt really restraining. And then once you get the freedom, like you can explore around, but you find stuff that you can't interact with yet because you don't have the right item, because they were keeping the like Link to the Past, Link's Awakening kind of Metroidvania gating, where you get an item that lets you do new things. But that clashed with the open world that they tried to do in The Wind Waker. So there's a lot of like problems with this experience, like rough spots. It was an amazing game anyways. But I think that they probably look back on the world of The Wind Waker as a failure, a structural failure. I don't have a quote to back that up. So then let's look at the Twilight Princess. It comes right after. Twilight Princess was kind of like a regression to Ocarina of Time. The Wind Waker was a sales failure, largely because the GameCube was a sales failure. And they in particular saw that the North American market was strong, where the Japanese market was weak at that time. So they were like, okay, we need to target North America. So we're going to cancel The Wind Waker 2, which they were working on, and make Twilight Princess instead. But in a lot of ways, they basically were like, we're just going to play it safe. It's going to be Ocarina of Time 2. And if you go back and play that game now, the overworld feels kind of like lifeless. Like it's probably the least enjoyable Hyrule field to be in of the series, because they just tried to copy Ocarina of Time. And by that point, Ocarina of Time was 8 years old. And that was old news.
Yeah.
And then Skyward Sword, they're like, okay, we've been struggling with these open worlds and these world designs. Let's just not do a world. Let's just do a level select system. I can point you to an interview where they straight out say that they were inspired by Mario's world select. They were like, let's just do that. So they basically went no more world, just levels. So they were actually like struggling and experimenting that whole time with how to make a world that felt good, that hit the notes they wanted to hit with Zelda. And basically people didn't like it. There's always problems.
When did they start to find their footing then?
A Link Between Worlds. if you read a bunch of interviews from that era, which is, 2012, 2013, this is when Breath of the Wild would have started early development, but they were also working on Link Between Worlds. And Eiji Aonuma, who's, of course, the producer of the series at that point, says stuff in interviews like, I think people are getting bored of Zelda. And I feel like I've sort of come to this realization that if players always know where to go next, then it might as well just be a linear game. And there's one interview with Chris Kohler over at The Wired where he's like, I thought letting the player get lost was a sin, a game design sin. But I realized that it's actually awesome to get lost. These are the sort of thoughts that were bubbling around for Eiji Aonuma, and presumably also internally on the team in this stretch of time between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. So they looked to Link Between Worlds to prove out these concepts. It was the first game where they let you, I think it was literally the first Zelda game where they let you do the dungeons in any order. Even Zelda 1 didn't let you do that. But they had that item rental system where instead of being gated by items that you had to go into dungeons to get, or being gated by story gating, you could just go rent the key, essentially, to the locks that were in front of you. And then you could do it in any order. And they thought that was a big success. In a lot of ways, the design of Breath of the Wild was informed by what they internally viewed as the big success of A Link Between Worlds.
So once again, the 2D game, in the 2D in the traditional sense, ends up inspiring an entire another generation of 3D Zelda.
Yeah, that's actually true. I hadn't really framed it that way in my own head before, but you're right. That's totally what happened.
I don't want to erase all of those games that come before all of this. What would you say is the most underrated Zelda game of this window between Ocarina and Breath of the Wild?
I will say, I was going to say the Four Sword Adventures, but I kind of don't even think of that as a Zelda game. So I will say the Wind Waker. And at this point, it's actually not really underrated anymore, but it was underrated for a very long time. And despite having a lot of problems and growing pains, I thought it was an amazing game that really nailed some of the elements that I think are defining for Zelda, like the coming of age story. It was the last Zelda game where you actually played as a kid, right?
Yeah.
And Miyamoto talks a lot about how the essence of Zelda is a kid growing up. He was the one who made them add Child Link to Ocarina of Time midway through production because he thought it was so important to the essence of Zelda for you to be a kid. That was also the last Zelda game Ocarina of Time was the last Zelda game that Miyamoto was really involved with. After that, he stepped further away from the series.
It's funny that you say this because earlier you're like, okay, after Ocarina of Time is Wind Waker. And my head was like, that can't be right because it looks nicer than everything. It is the game that now, if you play it, looks like it was probably the one that came out right before Breath of the Wild because the art design has held up so much better than really any art design, not just of a Zelda game, but really of any Nintendo game.
The way that game looks, I'm so sad that they canceled the Wind Waker 2 and made Twilight Princess. I would have much rather gotten Wind Waker 2.
Yeah.
At the time, I was excited about Twilight Princess, but now I'm like, no, I wanted the Wind Waker 2.
We all grow up to see the truth. Speaking of reading these rumors and little news items and everything, I want to take a quick break, and then we will come back for the final section where we can talk about the Zelda fan community.
Alrighty.
We are back. What are some of the earliest appearances or examples of a Zelda fan community?
Zelda headquarters, ZHQ.com, was the first Zelda fan site on the internet. I think that was 1996. The second one was called the North Castle, founded by Juliet Singleton. It was a fan community that focused on fan art and fan fiction, and it is still around. You can search for the North Castle, which is named after, I think, the cartoon castle, the Zelda cartoon's castle. And that website's still there, the second Zelda site ever made.
Am I right that Zelda.com was not a Zelda site early on?
That I'm not sure of. I don't recall a time when it wasn't owned by Nintendo.
The only reason I'm asking that very cautiously is I could have sworn one of my first internet experiences was the school computer lab in searching Zelda.com and definitely not getting Zelda.
Boy.
Definitely getting something very, very different. Which you kind of got when you searched for anything early on the internet.
I definitely found ZHQ by typing in Zelda into whatever the search engine would have been in like 97.
That makes sense, like web crawler or something.
Yeah. Prior to that, I don't know. It could have been, I could imagine Nintendo sicking the lawyers on someone.
I'm going to search this out, and I will include it in the show notes if it is what I think it is. What did the early internet Zelda fan community look like?
So the very earliest stuff, I was only a reader, but it was basically like static websites that people would hand update. Usually they had small staffs of 3 people, and a lot of them would have stuff like, there's a mailbag, and people will write an email to the site, and they'll pick the fun questions and answer them on the website. Or there was fan art and fan fiction, like I mentioned for North Castle, that was always there. Like if you're familiar with like old Nintendo Powers from the 90s, the sort of stuff that you would see in like the letters section and the fan art that was on the envelopes that they'd put in there. Like that was the sort of natural growth of that, was into the online Zelda community.
What was your earliest involvement or connection with the fandom?
I got involved in a bunch of Zelda forums a little bit later, like 2000, 1999. There were starting to have forums at all these fan sites, message boards. And so I got involved in a ton of those. And I pretty quickly, I was like really serious about it. I cared a lot about these communities. So I became a moderator, right? It's like I was a moderator at like, I don't know, 7 different Zelda forums over the course of the aughts. And I started writing for one of them, a site called ZeldaLegends.net, which was a major site in promoting Zelda timeline theorization and discussion. Like people, it was the site that people were first doing like dissections of the translation of the Link to the Past manual. Like what's different in the US version, and we should actually pay attention to the Japanese version. And I was big into that stuff at the time. And I eventually branched out and did the same at various other sites like Zelda Universe, which is still around, and a few others that, I won't bother to list because they're not around anymore.
How does Hyrule Interviews come to be?
Okay, there is one particular Zelda fan site called historyofhyrule.com. And it's run by a woman who goes by the name of Laura. Laura Hart is her online handle. And she was the first person to start really getting into archiving Zelda material. She was the one who was like scanning Japanese game guides to put up like never before seen official Zelda art. And she has these huge galleries, and she's been doing it ever since. Like she started in 2001 and she's still going today. She basically, every piece of Zelda art you see on the internet was scanned by her. And she's a good friend of mine. I've known her since those days. And I basically was inspired by her to start this website that I run called HyruleInterviews.com. And where she's, scanning images, I wanted to preserve and promote interviews with Zelda creators. So it's basically a database of interviews and quotes from interviews about Zelda or not about Zelda, but with someone who worked on a Zelda game. And I've been doing that for like 4 or 5 years now.
What are some of the most surprising things that you have learned in doing this?
Oh boy, let's see. I listed a bunch of really surprising things I've learned for Zelda 1. The same things you were reacting to, I was like, my mind is being blown right now. It was going to be a sci-fi game, and I found that out in a random English translation of a French interview that no one had ever seen before. I really love finding those little nuggets of surprising detail that I can then go... I post daily quotes on like social media, so I can go share it that way. There's fun stuff like, just last week I found out that Shigeru Miyamoto has a brother. He has an older brother. He never talks about this brother ever, except for in this one interview with Time Magazine for Kids, because the interviewer was a child, and he thought talking about siblings was going to help him connect with this kid that was interviewing him.
Wow.
That's how I learned Miyamoto has a brother. And I've done a lot of research into like who's the first woman who worked on Zelda. That's not really something that people talk about. Who was it? The answer is Minako Hamano, who was a composer on Link's Awakening. She then later went on to be a composer for the Metroid series. She did Link's Awakening, and then she did Super Metroid. That's the start of her musical career. Another noteworthy woman was Satomi Asakawa. She grew up in Japan, but she went to school at Digipin in Canada, back when Digipin was in Canada, because she wanted to make 3D movies, and she was really inspired by like Nightmare Before Christmas and a bunch of other like Western and CG movies and stuff. She loved stop motion animation. She applied to a ton of movie companies, and none of them took her. The only Japanese company she applied to was Nintendo, and she took the job there, and then she designed Kippura Gebora and a bunch of characters from Majora's Mask, the Bombchu Bowling Alley Girl, and later she was the NPC design lead for Twilight Princess, where you can see the Nightmare Before Christmas inspiration come back around.
That rules.
Those are the kind of rabbit holes I love to find.
We talked about all the different kind of, not false starts, but different directions that Zelda went over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fair to say that fandom is split across the different types of Zelda games or eras?
Yes. In 2014, I did a big survey of like 7,000 Zelda fans. I ran like a SurveyMonkey survey. And I accidentally picked the plan where they charge me per survey. So they sent me like $1,000 bill for this survey I ran that I had to negotiate down to like 300, which is still more than I wanted to spend on that. Anyways, it's neither here nor there. The point is, I found in that survey that if like that the fandom was largely split into like different groups. There was the group that their favorite games were Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. And those tended to be the same people that would rate story as their number one priority. Like they care the most about feeling like they're embodied in the story of a Zelda game.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people, they would rate like Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time as their favorites. And they were the people that would pick exploration as their number one priority. So like they were very clear delineations in the community around people's favorites.
And how has that changed now? I can only speak as a pseudo outsider here, but every once in a while I'm on youtube.com and I see some people upset about Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. Is there that much of a divide, or is that like my YouTube algorithm trying to create a controversy where there isn't one?
I don't have a good sense of the like numbers here, like what percentage of people feel this way or that way. I'm a little bit less involved with that side of the community than I used to be. But there are definitely a lot of like Zelda fans who would prefer to go back to the Ocarina of Time style, right? Like they miss that style of, they don't want the open world. They want to have a story that they play through and dungeons that give them permanent items, and like people miss that. And then there's all sorts of offshoots and small groups too. Like you'll find the person who like their favorite game is Phantom Hourglass on the DS, a game that everyone else hates and thinks is bad. But you know, they loved it. Often it means it was their first one, but not always. Like I know a guy, he loves Zelda 2. He thinks it's great. He wishes they would make another Zelda game like Zelda 2. So it's all over the place.
That's fair. There's something for everybody. Before we wrap up, I do want to hear a few more names of key players in preserving the history of Zelda. You've mentioned some, but who are some other people that listeners should check out?
Oh, let's see. So Melora Hart from History of Hyrule is the one I mentioned already. There's a whole community of preservationists that organize in a group called Gaming Alexandria. They're a super important group. They scan hundreds, thousands of magazines over the years. Like they do a lot of really valuable preservation work that like I use, for instance, because I can go find a scan of some random magazine I've never heard of that they scanned and put online. A lot of those will appear at a website called retromags.com, which is another important resource for preservation. You know, there's a guy named Javid Sterrett who runs something called the Hyrule Journals, which is a YouTube channel. But he's done like really cool research where he's done deep dives on certain topics. Like he kind of found the English writer for Majora's Mask, and interviewed that guy and did like a 20-minute video about Majora's Mask with all this unique interviewing material that he did or dug up. So like he does amazing work. I feel bad for the people I'm not going to mention right now, but I can't remember everyone. There's a guy I've always known who his name is Mac, M-A-K. I think his real name is Matt. He goes by Game Master Matt these days. But he doesn't have a website. He doesn't have a big presence, but he's the guy I go to when I have a question about like 90s or 80s or 90s Zelda. I'll be like, I don't remember this thing. And he has like photographic memory for like everything.
The last thing that I do want to ask you though, is it's the anniversary. Can we expect anything? Are there any rumors? What should people be looking forward to?
So a lot of people are really excited about what might be revealed for the 40th. You know, people will be like, oh, maybe now they'll finally release the remakes for Twilight Princess and The Wind Waker on the Switch, because we've been waiting for that for 7 years. You know, so stuff like that floats around, hopes and dreams. I haven't heard of any rumors that I would consider credible. The reality is, you know, video games are multi-million, tens of millions of dollars investments from companies. So they're not really making like release schedule decisions based on the 40th anniversary. But if there is something where it's time for it to be revealed anyways, they'll totally use the 40th anniversary as to be like a little marketing boost. And it is probably about time for a new Zelda game announcement within the next year based on historical trends. So, yeah, maybe they're going to announce a new Zelda game in a week.
I hope that by the time that this goes live, there'll just be one out and people will be like, Chris, how did you not see it coming? Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Where should people go check out your stuff?
Most important one would just be HyroleInterviews.com. You can go find a database of interviews and quotes and browse it and search through it and filter the results and do all sorts of fun stuff. I also post daily quotes on Tumblr, Blue Sky, and Mastodon under the name Hyrule Interviews. And I myself have a personal account that I'm very active on Blue Sky, which is my name, Max Nichols.
I love it. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
We got the metaphorical sword, boomerang, and bombs of historical knowledge. That's a stretch, isn't it? That one doesn't quite work. Between that and the leaf thing at the intro, I gotta be honest, I'm struggling. But not next time, because next time on Past Games, the exclusive Patreon series, I'll be going deep on Dark Souls, the original Souls game, which actually isn't true because Demon Souls came before it, but you know what I mean. I am really excited to dig into this game because its series is both very well documented, but a bit misunderstood. So we'll be going into that very, very soon. I don't need to do the rest of the show goodbye thing because you're already here. You're already supporting the show. And for that, I just want to say thank you because I really, 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 really could not be doing this without your support. It means the world to me. One other thing, I've been doing songs at the end of episodes, and I thought, why not do that here too? So, the original theme for the beginning of the Legend of Zelda title screen. No, not the version that Nintendo wrote, but here is Bolero by Maurice Ravel, performed by the Orchestra de l'Opéra Nationale de Paris? Maybe? I'm sorry. There's a link in the show notes. Like I said, struggling. I'll see you very, very soon. Oh, and also, heads up, Bolero famously opens very, very, very soft and then gets very, very, very loud. So I wouldn't adjust your volume right away. Just trust me.